Narcissus, the original selfie. Roughly 3,000 years ago, the ancient Greeks invented a cautionary tale about a beautiful young man named Narcissus who discovered his own reflection in a pool of water and became so utterly captivated by what he saw that he simply couldn't look away. He stared at himself, and stared some more, until eventually, depending on which version of the myth you prefer, he either withered away from neglect or fell into the water while attempting a selfie. The Greeks gave us democracy, philosophy, the Olympic Games, and apparently the first recorded warning about excessive self-obsession. They were, as usual, ahead of their time. So what exactly is narcissism? And is it really getting worse? In clinical psychology, narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, an insatiable need for admiration, and a significant lack of empathy. It is a real, diagnosable condition, and it is considerably more complicated than simply taking too many photos of yourself at brunch. In contemporary psychology, NPD extends beyond a fixation on physical appearance, encompassing traits such as intelligence, charisma, success, and power. And here is where the neuroscience becomes genuinely fascinating. MRI studies show that individuals diagnosed with NPD often exhibit reduced gray matter volume in areas of the brain linked to empathy, specifically the anterior insula and the prefrontal cortex. Narcissistic individuals retain cognitive empathy, the ability to understand what others feel, while showing significant deficits in affective empathy, actually feeling what others feel. This dissociation explains why someone can describe your pain with perfect accuracy while doing nothing to stop causing it. That is a distinction worth sitting with. The narcissist isn't incapable of reading the room. They simply don't feel it the way you do. They can identify your distress like reading a weather forecast, accurately, analytically, and with roughly the same level of personal investment. Now, is narcissism actually rising? This is where the story gets more complicated than the headline suggests. In 2008, psychologist Gene Twenge and colleagues analyzed data from 85 samples of American college students who had completed the Narcissistic Personality Inventory between 1979 and 2006. They found that narcissism levels rose by a whopping 30% over this period. The media, delighted, immediately declared a narcissism epidemic. Time magazine put millennials on the cover in 2013, calling them the me generation. Self-esteem was apparently out of control. The selfie stick, brilliantly and correctly, was briefly renamed Narcissistic. But here's the twist. A massive 2025 study of 540,000 people found no meaningful increase in grandiose narcissism over the last 40 years. Young people today are not measurably more self-absorbed than previous generations. Social media appears to act as a megaphone for existing narcissistic traits, not a factory that reshapes personality. In other words, social media didn't create more narcissists. It simply gave the existing ones a significantly larger audience and considerably better lighting. But here's the piece of this that matters most, and it contains a surprise. Research shows that higher narcissism scores are associated with lower connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum, areas associated with the ability to think positively about oneself. Low activity in these areas may actually drive people with NPD to repeatedly seek out affirmation from others. This means that beneath the grandiosity, the bragging, the relentless need for admiration, there's often a self-concept so fragile, so fundamentally insecure, that external validation becomes not a preference, but a compulsion. And brain differences don't erase responsibility. Narcissists are not helpless victims of faulty wiring. They choose again and again to ignore opportunities for connection and compassion. And in making those choices, they strengthen the very pathways that keep them disconnected. The armor is impressive, but it is armor, and underneath it, the research consistently finds is someone who doesn't actually think very highly of themselves at all. Narcissus, remember, fell in love with a reflection, not the real thing, a surface, an image. something that looked back at him with perfect adoration but could never actually know him. There's a reason the Greeks thought that was a tragedy. So what do we do with all of this? If you recognize these traits in someone in your life, the conversation that somehow always returns to them, the empathy that appears when it's useful and vanishes when it isn't, the criticism that lands like an attack while praise is accepted as simply overdue, the research offers a reframe. You're not dealing with someone who loves themselves too much. You're dealing with someone who cannot tolerate the version of themselves that exists without an audience. And if, reading all of this, you find yourself wondering whether any of it applies to you, the fact that you're asking that question is itself fairly compelling evidence that you're probably fine. Narcissus never once asked himself if he was looking too long. Please like and subscribe.